Is Friday morning, June the 2nd, 10 a.m., and this is a special edition of Tracking the Tropics. I'm WESH 2 meteorologist Eric Burris in Central Florida.
I'm Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson of WJCL 22 in Savannah, Georgia.
We have a couple of things to talk about, Jeremy. We're doing this special edition today because there is something that is brewing out in the Gulf of Mexico. Let's take a look at the visible satellite. And Jeremy, we see that counterclockwise spin. Hurricane hunters are inside investigating. This, my friend, is Tropical Depression 2.
Yeah, and it looks like here maybe within the last hour or so, there's some additional thunderstorm development or convection that's at least somewhat close to the center. And this is mainly, if you cut this in half, north-south, a lot of this is on the eastern half.
Yeah, there's a lot of wind shear, and that's the reason that this hasn't exploded and become a big, powerful hurricane or anything to that point. But very normal for this May/June weather pattern where we've got upper level winds that are kind of filtering into it. I'll show you the water vapor channel. This looks about halfway up in the atmosphere. And Jeremy, think of this like an X-ray, right? Just kind of looking at the environment upstairs around the storm system.
Yeah, and it looks like you have dry air, especially to the west and south of it, but then in and around the center where you have those pink colors, that's representing higher water content, and that's where the thunderstorms are at.
Right, but there's a lot of that wind shear kind of shearing all of that moisture over toward the east, which is why there's a ton of moisture east of Florida, out over the Bahamas, and what's happening is the storm system's trying to fire up these storms over that center of circulation, but the upper level winds are kind of shearing it apart. So at this point in time, we don't anticipate this to become a big bad hurricane. That's certainly good news. Nobody wants to see that, but it's trying, and you got to kind of give the storm credit where credit's due. So 5 a.m. advisory is the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. Winds are 35 miles an hour. Pressure is at 1,007 millibars. But, Jeremy, there's a recon mission in there, and we've been finding that pressure steadily dropping over the course of the last few hours' time.
Yeah, you have some awesome graphics that show that can kind of track the hurricane hunters when they're within these storms. I think what we're just waiting for right now is not necessarily the wind gusts. There's some tropical storm force winds in there. We're waiting to see if there's maybe a little more closed off low as they do some of these drop sons into the storm.
Right. So think of this. So this is a really ugly graphic, and this is not something I would be showing on TV. But what we're looking at is the raw data from the hurricane hunters. It's zigzagging through the storm system, okay? And what it's doing is it's leaving breadcrumbs. It's dropping pieces of data on here to show us wind intensity and wind direction. And specifically, what we're looking for is the turning of the wind. So you can kind of see here, for example, and this is getting into the weeds, right? But you've got like a southwest wind, a northwest wind, and then it kind of up here turns more of a like northeasterly direction. So what I think the hurricane hunters are doing right now is they're trying to see if there's a closed off low, because we see on their SFMR, their step frequency microwave radiometer, or however you say that, we see tropical storm force winds. They're fairly removed from the center of circulation. So based on wind intensity, Jeremy, this could qualify as being a tropical storm. But is it tight enough? Is it an open, broad low, or is it a closed off low? And that's the difference between this being a tropical depression and being a tropical storm.
Right. Do you know how much longer their mission is? How much longer they'll be flying around in there?
Yeah. So the mission runs from 7 a.m. until 1:30 this afternoon. Everything okay over there?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I'll just get him over here. You can take me off here for 1 second.
Okay. All right. You got it. We have dogs. We've got dogs. We got to do our thing. That's okay. But yeah, so when we look at the recon mission that's in the air right now, the hurricane hunters are in there now. They've been in there since 7 o'clock this morning. And the expectation is that they're going to be in the storm system through about 1:30 this afternoon. Then there's a bit of a break, a crew change, if you will, and then we'll be able to get to the next mission, which will get into the storm at about 7 o'clock tonight and go through the overnight. It's important to note, though, when we look at the overall forecast from the National Hurricane Center, okay, this is a storm system that is not expected to have a very long life cycle, okay? Yesterday, the first cone did call for tropical storm intensity today through about tonight, and then weakening to a tropical depression. And then Saturday into Sunday, you see that L is without a circle around it. So that is a remnant low, essentially. So the idea here is that over the next few hours' time, the wind shear starts to increase, thus impacting the storm system. So even if it were in the next few minutes' time given an opportunity to strengthen to Arlene, Jeremy, it would be a very short-lived upgrade.
Yeah, and that was kind of the forecast the entire time, was if it ended up being named, it was maybe 12, 24 hours, something like that.
Right.
Probably the number one question I got on social media yesterday, and I know you kind of touched on this, but why kind of the very weird track where it's like maybe in the northern Gulf and then it heads down towards Cuba? And if you want to put like spaghetti plots on here, that low sort of curves around and then starts tracking its way to the northeast. So yeah, there it heads into the southwestern Atlantic, and then people are like, oh, could it re-strengthen? But as we've talked about, there's a lot of wind shear with this, not favorable for development. So you need a lot of things to happen. You can't just say, well, the water temperature is maybe 80 to 85 degrees. We'll for sure have tropical development. Sometimes I use a reference like maybe baking a cake or something. If you leave some ingredients out, the end result is not going to be very good. So in this case here with a tropical system, several factors in play, and we're maybe just going to marginally get those to come together to get a named storm briefly this morning, and if not, this will remain a tropical depression. It's
really interesting because, and this past weekend we were talking a lot on social media, both of us, about the subjectivity of the weather, right? Because you've got tropical storm force winds here, but it's up to the person at the National Hurricane Center, and then this is not knocking them at all, but it's up to the person at the National Hurricane Center to look at this recon data and say, yeah, that's tight enough, or it's a little too open, and they can always go back and tweak it, go back and adjust it, but it just depends on that interpretation as to if this is a closed off low or if this is still a little too open for a tropical storm upgrade.
Right. And one thing that we were discussing that we like about this is that hurricane hunters are out there. Due to how close that coastal low was actually last weekend to the southeast coast, I would have loved to have seen some real data from the hurricane hunters. Since it was close to land, would have been a pretty easy mission to go out there and get some real-time data. I would have really been curious to see what some of those actual winds were if they kind of went in different quadrants of that low last weekend. And maybe they go in there and then they sort of dispel any type of thought that it could have been tropical or subtropical.
No doubt about it. So on to questions that we're getting, Jeremy. Chrissy is asking, will it bring wind and rain to any land area? And you know, I think directly the answer, you know, when we think of tropical systems, we think of hurricanes. And thankfully, Jeremy, this is not a hurricane. This is not a big, bad storm. I think indirect impacts to Florida, it just depends. If this stays kind of sloppy and loose, then it could give Florida an added opportunity for some rainfall. But if it starts to try to organize and deepen, it would actually starve Florida of moisture.
Yeah, and it's staying to your west so far. I know parts of your state definitely need some rain, so this would be good news. And early on in the season, you can get these lows that might be really weak, and overall they are sort of a net good news if they're bringing decent amounts of rain to an area, but obviously not enough to like cause flash flooding or something. So tropical systems have a benefit to coastal areas, islands across the Atlantic basin. And this one maybe will be bringing some appreciable rains if it can maybe send a little of that moisture your way.
Yeah. One thing that's always interesting, and not a lot of people realize, Florida's climate depends on at least one weak storm system to make landfall, to just soak us. So if this were to try to do something like that, that's not the worst thing in the world. But this is not going to be that, because by the time, as you had mentioned, by the time it moves south, it weakens. So let's do this, Jeremy. Let's look at the 6Z model data. Let's start with our in-house models, okay? We call this Futurecast. Hold on a second. What do you call it up there?
Futurecast.
Oh, wow. So super creative. Okay, great.
Yes.
So, love that for us. All right, so first off, Futurecast is initializing this, showing kind of the yellows and oranges and the reds. So Futurecast is initializing this as a tropical storm as of the 6Z run, which...
I think that model you're showing, which one are you showing? The IBM?
Yeah, the IBM model.
I would say a couple days ago it was a little bit aggressive with how fast it developed this. Again, maybe this is showing a little bias towards it being slightly on the strong side with this particular model.
And it definitely does. It definitely does. But notice how it pushes to the south, though. All right, so let's just rewind this. So here's today, right? Watch as it pushes south. Here's Saturday morning. Watch those vibrant yellows going away and even those greens going away. And it literally collapsing in as it approaches the west end there of Cuba. Whatever this does try to become, it will quickly lose its luster as it gets further and further to the south.
Right. So maybe it's Arlene. Otherwise, it's, hey, we had unnamed storm in January. Now this is TD2.
This is actually, so I didn't even think about it. The 12Z run on Futurecast is starting to come in, and it's still showing, okay, it's still showing probably tropical storm intensity right in here through this afternoon, and then pushing south and unraveling. And that's as far, it goes out there. That's as far out as the 12Z run.
And one thing I'm thinking about is, so far we've had these things like the coastal low, which maybe it could have been subtropical, ended up not being named. Now you have this system that's bordering on becoming something. National Hurricane Center, obviously they go back and look at these, but they're going to be put in kind of an odd spot where if they happen to go back and look and they find something that would support this, then we're going to have unnamed storm, probably unnamed storm, and kind of an odd thing, because when we talk about these on TV now, we're like, well, we had an unnamed storm, now we're actually on to the second name, but it's the first name in the list, and we try to keep things simple for viewers with, again, the line you like to use without getting too much into the weeds of meteorology. And that's what people care about is this going to impact me or not?
Right. Like, this is a nice venue for us to get in the weeds, but we try, we try to keep it as simple as possible. And that's the difference between like the academia side of things versus the broadcast side of things. So 12Z is just starting to initialize on the GFS. So this is the 6Z run, which is the most recent. And the GFS this morning has kept it let me try this again, below tropical storm intensity. So it's kept it as kind of a depression and nothing else, and you can see it kind of falls apart there. And then the European, which I thought was interesting, we're not going to have but the 6Z run on the European. But the European model this morning, Jeremy, same idea. Bringing it up to about depression/storm status, but never really crossing over into storm, maybe storm, but never crossing in much, and then weakening as it moves down toward Cuba. So, each model, some are trending a little higher and some are trending a little lower, but all of the models in unison are showing this weakening as it pushes further and further to the south.
Yeah. So, we're less than an hour away from probably the final verdict on if this will be named or not.
Yeah, and I'm just looking. I don't see any updates from the Hurricane Center on the back end. I've got some automation. Did I tell you about that?
Yes.
Okay, so I've got some automation to kind of check the Hurricane Center database to give me a heads up, and I don't have any updates. So at least at the moment, they're not changing things around in the background for an upgrade. And certainly, it's going to be one of those things where I'm guessing they're going to wait for like a last push through the center of circulation to see, as I'm refreshing this, I would imagine that they're going to probably want one more push through the center of circulation to see what kind of winds are in there before putting out their product, I would guess. Right.
And the hurricane hunters aren't far from land. This isn't a real far mission for them, so they can kind of do several passes through.
Yeah, they've already done, I think, 3 or 4. Let me pull up the raw data here again. This graphic absolutely brings my computer to its knees. It's just such a memory-intensive product. So let's just see. Okay, so let's go back. So they're currently flying away, sampling the northwest side. So what my guess would be is that you see them. That's where they are there.
Well, they're pretty far away now.
They may even be heading back in. Actually, no, they're still within range. I don't know. I don't know if they're heading back in or not. They're supposed to be in the storm for a little while longer. So maybe they've got what they need, and that's not, and they won't upgrade, and they're just done. You know.
Right. Okay. One thing that we want to talk about is since we last talked about the tropics on Tuesday, we did get some new information on a long-range forecast. So most people are familiar with like Colorado State, National Hurricane Center, their long-range hurricane season forecast. Well, Phil Klotzbach at Colorado State, the lead researcher there that puts together the hurricane season forecast. His initial forecast that came out in April was 13 named storms, and then yesterday he does an update to start the hurricane season, has increased that to 15 named storms.
And we had talked about this on our Tracking the Tropics episode that we did on Tuesday. We knew, I had chatted with Phil, and he said that he was probably going to have to up his numbers. So from 13 to 15, from 6 to 7, and from 2 to 3. But when we look now at all of the forecasts as they stand currently, that puts Colorado State's forecast, well, in the big goalposts that are the NOAA forecast, but it now puts Colorado State into your and my hurricane season forecast as well.
Yep. And we, back on March 1st, went 14 to 18 named storms based on several different factors. Again, we'll see how things play out, but I'd say the forecasts now are kind of started to line up a little bit.
Yeah. I think that we're starting to realize. Well, we had done this in March, but I think that everybody's realizing that yes, El Nino is approaching, but at the same time, we have to realize that the water temperatures are anomalously hot, the hottest that they've ever been heading into hurricane season as an Atlantic basin, and as such, that will play into the overall numbers. So we'll see if this gets named or not. That will certainly count to this board. But nobody's cheering for storms. Nobody's cheering for impacts, I think, at the end of the day.
And as we talked about on Tuesday, once this potential little system gets out of the Gulf and heads into the Southwest Atlantic, June may quiet down. There's a couple little parts of the pattern we're watching, but I think there's a much greater potential we could have a little busier July this year.
Oh yeah, 100%. That's what the pattern is kind of suggesting. So that'll be something to watch. There's a couple little pieces of the puzzle, during June, but as far as like near land elements, I think that we're probably going to be running just a little bit quieter. Okay, people, before we wrap this up, does anybody have any good questions? Chrissy is asking, Jeremy, how common are hurricanes in the month of June? Mostly August and September, right?
I think it's, isn't the number like 5% of named storms have occurred during the month of June? I'm showing that graphic recently.
I'm looking. Tropical named storms by month percentage. Okay. I'm good. I'm just not that good. Okay, there it is. So 5%.
Okay.
Yeah, so 5% of the named storms occur during the month of June. Yeah. All right. Other questions. Terry says, hard to believe the storm will flat out quit on its own with no interference. I mean, it's getting interference.
Yeah. Some wind shear, and that'll strengthen in the days ahead.
Yeah. Norman's asking, why do we count fish storms, Jeremy?
I mean, in the satellite era, anything counts, and we've gotten really good at being able to detect these. So, yeah, I mean, anything that reaches the criteria of tropical depression, and then eventually maybe tropical storm hurricane gets a name, it counts in the season total.
Yeah,
that's why you saw that one back in January ended up being a subtropical subtropical cyclone, and it was named.
Absolutely. All right. So Lorelai's asking, leaving on a cruise on Sunday, headed to the Bahamas on Monday, and then to Mexico. Will this storm be around to affect the path of our ship?
For what day?
Leaving on a cruise Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. This is going to be a ripped apart area of clouds. You may get some showers, Lorelai. I don't think that it's going to be much more than that at all.
I think anyone in the Southwest Atlantic, the waves could be a little choppy.
Yeah, but it's not going to be a hurricane, not going to be a tropical storm, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Jamie on YouTube, from a layman's perspective, it seems as though the National Hurricane Center has gone very conservative in naming the storms.
I don't know if I'd say that, but I mean, you'd probably have to look at 2 years or more coming up. I mean, there is a new director at the National Hurricane Center. I don't know him. Maybe you do, Eric, but I don't think the philosophy on the surface is going to change. I mean, there's criteria to name these, and like I said, maybe in 2 years, if we see that some systems that are maybe somewhat marginal, a little bit, like you said, subjective, aren't being named or are being named.
Right.
Maybe we'll pick up on a trend, but I don't think you can't read into that right now.
I think what's happening, and this is just my personal opinion, but I think as satellite imagery, as satellite imagery gets better, like think about this. This is a visible satellite that we get a new frame every single minute. We've never had that kind of resolution or that update. So I think as satellite imagery and as technology as a whole gets better, Jamie, I think that the Hurricane Center is better able to determine if things meet their criteria or not. Think about in Hurricane Andrew, think of the resolution of that satellite data. They were giving 2-day advice. There was a hurricane watch posted 2 days before this Cat 5 moved into Miami-Dade County. I just think technology is allowing them to more subjectively look at things. I mean, I could be completely wrong, Jeremy.
Yeah, and it's not like they have an easy job down there, because once they name something, that sets a whole other set of things into motion with the local National Weather Service offices. So there's a lot of coordination that takes place. But hey, if they think something should be named, I think they'll name it.
Oh, 100%. I mean, just look at this yesterday. They went from a 20% chance of development in 7 days' time and in 2 days' time to 70% chance to naming it. So they can write a rule book and then throw it out if they feel that there's, if it meets that criteria. So, and I think that we're all, as a society, just trying to keep up with technology. I think technology is evolving quicker than our own minds,
Right.
I think that's the truth. Terry's asking, so wind shear has to be powerful enough to blast a storm like this to fall apart without any impact?
Yeah, it can just take the top of it. You need almost all the variables to be perfect in place, especially if you're talking about like the development of a hurricane or something like that. Right now, we just have a depression, and the winds are even impacting something this small, not organized.
And when and it's like when you look at this is the water vapor channel, we had talked about it, but like a storm needs to ventilate. A storm needs to breathe. And when you've got a bunch of dry air on a thing that needs moisture, that's hampering it. And you see all of these jet streams there. That's a lot of wind shear. Wind shear, it's kind of like, think of it like you're driving your car and you hit a gust of wind and you feel your car shake, right? Well, you don't like that, so you have to correct. Well, for a storm to get stronger and stronger, it can't spend its energy correcting. It wants to just grow. And so dry air and wind shear keep these storms calmer and calmer. That's just the way that it runs. Wesh2 News is asking from the main page. Thomas asks, do you think that we're going to see our first named storm sometime this month? I would say, why not? 5% of the named storms happen. Water temperatures are hot, even if it's a fish storm. Jeremy, your thoughts?
I mean, last year, what was it? Our third named storm occurred. It was Colin, and that was in around July, kind of first, second, third time frame, very short-lived, but that was a third named storm. Obviously, we've had one that was back in January, but our first named storm, I think there's a chance that this month we could get something that develops, and if it's not right now, it might be the back half of the month.
Oh yeah, late June into July, we're going to really notice things dialing up and getting more and more active. So, and for right now, it's good to note, and I love to say this, that things are pretty quiet as a whole other than this thing in the Gulf. It's not like there's chaos ensuing, but this thing in the Gulf is in an area that we do typically have to watch this time of year, Jeremy.
Yeah, and this little depression is right over that sort of tan-colored area where formation is maybe slightly more likely this time of year. And remember, only 5% of named storms occur during the month of June, but if there is a favorite area, it's definitely that eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico.
Jennifer's asking, will this storm continue to cycle through as possible bigger storms during hurricane season? Jeremy, I mean, this is the Nicole part of the pattern, but I think that the reason that this hasn't had the opportunity to develop is because the favorable area is east of Florida.
Yeah, and I mean, every single time that these things cycle through, especially early in the season, a lot of times we don't even expect it to develop, but if we see a reflection of it, it's a sign of, hey, all right, we have 2 more cycles to go in hurricane season with this particular part of the pattern. So This is definitely something. I think the September version, if there wasn't a named storm during it, I would be shocked.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. So again, let's just leave it at this. A live look at minute-by-minute updates on Tropical Depression 2 within the next few minutes' time. We do expect an update from the National Hurricane Center on this, whether or not they're going with an upgrade. Of course, as I'm saying this, Jeremy, I'm getting a vortex message from the hurricane hunters. You talk for a second. Let me read this.
Okay. All right. So what you're looking at there, we still have the visible satellite up. And the part that looks kind of bumpy and solid white and a little more textured there, that's the thunderstorms developing a little bit closer to the center of circulation. So that's the area we are watching. If thunderstorms would continue to grow, the convection builds closer to that center. And maybe if we could even get some smaller development there on that west side of the circulation, maybe we'd be looking at a tropical storm. But did you find out anything there?
Yeah, so they extrapolated the pressure down to 1,001 millibars, which would be indicative of it continuing to deepen. But is it open enough or is it closed off enough? They had 15-knot winds in the center of circulation, so it's not dead calm. And they found the maximum wind was 46 knots, about 51 nautical miles from the center. So the winds that still shows the wind shear, but 46 knots, that's 50 and change miles per hour. So if this can close itself off, it would be a tropical storm. The question is, has it closed itself off enough?
Right. So we have the 11 a.m. update. They don't, unless there's something special, they're not really doing the 2 p.m. I don't think. No. And then 5 p.m. is the next one. So you have 11 a.m., 5 p.m., and if it's not named, then probably not going to be.
Yeah, and it looks like the hurricane hunters are heading back. It looks like they're done. So my guess is that they're going to, it's a subjective call, but they've gotten the data that they need for that. So we'll see what happens in the next couple of minutes. Hey, thank you everybody for joining us from Central Florida. I'm WESH 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And I'm Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson at WJCL in Savannah, Georgia.
All right, we'll see you guys and gals on Tuesday for our next regularly scheduled update of Tracking the Tropics. Thanks for joining.